Hello everyone, this is Mead Skelton with a very special presentation on the Germanic build, a phenotype theory. Now a lot of folks might be asking, what is a phenotype? Well, a phenotype is the physical characteristics of an individual, usually based on their genetic and cultural heritage. So many people that lived in certain areas of parts of the world sort of developed their own physical characteristics. And in this presentation, I'll be talking about the Germanic build. The Germanic build is characteristics of many people that live in central and southern Germany, and it is rather unique. So let's talk about the Germanic build. What is it? Who is it? Where is it? Typically, this is also known as the Bavarian build because people in Bavaria are sort of the pinnacle of that type. And it is also found in central and southern Germany, but it's not limited to Germany. It's limited to the countries of Germanic heritage, which include Austria, Denmark, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. And it's basically a combination of three main European phenotypes, which include the Alpine, the Atlantic, and Cro-Magnon. So when you blend the Germanic and Celtic influences, you created a people that were very strong, hardy, and could live off the land. But also it might include the peasants, but also some of the nobility of the region also possessed the strong Germanic build. But it also is important to note that not all Germans have what I call the Germanic build. There are many different tribes of Germany, just like anywhere else. So different peoples and different tribes have different characteristics. The Hallstatts, for example, are very much the opposite way. They are lean and tall and very slender, and they have a narrow frame, and they usually have blonde hair and blue eyes. And those Germans usually reside in the northeastern part of Germany, what used to be called Prussia. They are not typically what we associate with the Germanic build. But for all intents and purposes, I'm talking about the Bavarian build that is particular to a certain group of Germans. So basically, the Germanic build is three phenotypes. So you have the Alpines, which were shorter in stature and broader in frame, and they have rounded-like faces with more childlike features. Now the Alpines get their name from the Alps, because that is the mountainous region they're from, and they can be found in various countries such as France, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and even Italy. Those areas contain the Alpine people. The Atlantids, on the other hand, were much taller and more slender, with very longer faces, narrower faces, usually have dark hair and blue eyes, and they're found anywhere in northwestern Europe. But primarily, when we think of Atlantids, we think of the British, the very British, or even the Swedish or Finnish type people, the Scandinavians. They are slighter of frame than Alpines. That doesn't mean they're shorter, but they're much narrower frame. They don't have the dense bones of Alpines and Cro-Magnons. Now the Cro-Magnons are a strong, sturdy people with very large craniums, dense bones, longer limbs, and are much taller than average. So they usually have dark or blonde hair, and they're very robust, and they can be found in most central and northwest Europe. So yes, they're also found in some of the Slavic countries, such as Hungary and those places. And they're typically associated with Neanderthal admixture, but I want to point out that I believe that Neanderthals were fully human. They died out, and they're just a ethnicity of humans that either died out or blended in with incoming groups. Now, these are the physical traits of the Germanic build. We talked a little bit this before, but here's some of the physical traits. Now, when we think of Germanic build, the key word is broad. People that are very broad, very large frame people, those are the people with Germanic builds. Now, the women are nice and buxom. They have large chests with wide shoulders and wide hips, good for birthing. And the men are very broad with really big legs. They have very big legs and a small waist. Now this is very good for bodybuilding. As you notice, I put a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's a good example of the Germanic build. He's from Austria. Now it is is noted that Arnold Schwarzenegger did turn to steroid abuse later, so I did not include any of those pictures. I tried to find his earlier days when he was more natural, or we assume natural, because that's more authentic to his natural build. The steroid abuse did change his type a little bit. But as you can see in these younger photos of Arnold Schwarzenegger, he did have that classic Germanic build, being an Austrian. So people with Germanic builds have large heads, which there's nothing, usually they're always they're not out of proportion. Their heads are as big as their bodies, and they have large rib cages, broad shoulders, and very dense bones. They're usually, they can be kind of shorter than average due to the alpine influence, but usually they're average to slightly taller. Now, Arnold Schwarzenegger was 6'1" or 6'2", so that was considered very tall in his era. But now it's sort of at the high end of average, so I put 5'8" to 6'1" for men and 5'4" to 5'9" for women. So athletically, they're very good at strength sports, but not as good as at endurance, such as running. And they also have to say that people with Germanic build do have a tendency to put on fat to gain weight, because it's part of the endomesomorph type. However, they also have a tendency to be naturally muscular, so they're very good at gaining muscle. They're typically dark hair with very fair skin, as you can see with Arnold. They have very, usually brown or hazel eyes, sometimes blue. Blondes are not uncommon, but in Bavaria and people with the Germanic build, usually they have more dark hair, tend to have more dark hair than blonde. Now, the Germanic build is a perfect blend of the endomesomorphic somatic type. Now, as a theory, there's three main body types. So, the Germanic build, they get their strength and their muscularity from the mesomorph types. They can be very lean, but the endomorph type gives them their width. So they're very broad and sturdy. And the mesomorph gives them their length, because they tend to have very long limbs, as opposed to short limbs like the endomorph. So they're not pure endo or meso, they're a combination of both, which kind of gives them the best of both worlds, because they can be, they can really become strong and muscular, but they also, unfortunately, the downside is they can get very fat. So if you have a Germanic build, you tend to be prone to store weight. And unlike most types, people with Germanic build tend to get fat all over. So they don't just have a big belly or something, they get fat all over, which is actually not as unhealthy. So that is the basic description of the somatic type for Germanic builds. So here's just some pictures of people with Germanic builds. Unfortunately, I could only find the stereotypical lederhosen, but you notice that the men are very broad shoulders, and they're very sturdy looking, as opposed to the Hallstatts. They're not thin and narrow, they're wider. So here's some pictures of people with Germanic builds. Notice that the women have very nice bosom areas, and they tend to be very broad, but still very feminine. But they also have their very large head, and their bones match their face, and so their face is also very broad. People with Germanic builds also have broad faces, which match their limbs. And also you can see the faces of people with Germanic builds are very broad, and again, it matches their build. So they can have very broad faces and broad builds. The woman in the center picture is a very classic picture of a German lady with a Germanic build. Very broad and very strong, but still very feminine. And yes, Donald Trump, he has Germanic heritage, and he's a perfect example of a Germanic president with Germanic build. Then you have some random guy in lederhosen and Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I think this is a very good way to determine. You just look at the shape of the people and the width of the people, and you can pretty much easily see that these people are very much have the Germanic Bavarian phenotype. So in conclusion, when it comes to Germanic builds and health, there's really no kind of theory as to longevity, how long they live, how how much they are health-wise. But because people with Germanic builds have large, sturdy frames and very dense bones, the high bone density helps protect them from breaking bones later in life. And also, they are less likely to decrease very much in height. You can see with Arnold Schwarzenegger, he is still very much close to 6'1", now approaching his mid-70s, I believe. And so he's very much the same height as he was years ago. So they don't lose their height or their bone density as they age. It is truly a blessing to have a Germanic build. Thank you so much for watching this phenotype theory presentation. If you are into phenotypes, or if you have a desire, there's a whole lot of resources which will tell you the different phenotypes in the different parts of the world in which they reside. There are many different phenotypes and classifications, and I urge you to get involved and learn more about your phenotype, because it can help you learn what exercises are good for you and what diet is best for you. Thanks so much for watching, folks, and I encourage everyone to have a blessed day or evening. God bless you. Bye.